Welcome in to the best in true crime podcasting. This is True Crime Tuesday. Folks, we have got a show for you. I'll tell you that. Let's put it this way. I want you to imagine, if you will, that you are serving our country. And you're doing your best. And you've been serving your country for quite a while now. Your family lineage goes back to 1847. You have a long family history of serving this country and doing what's right by our country. And through just a few missteps, friending the wrong people, you've gotten yourself into a bit of a pickle. Even worse yet, you meet the love of your life in the service of our country, and she gets drawn into a conspiracy that you can't believe. Even by trying to do the right thing, she loses her life. And what's worse yet, you get blamed for the murder. And you had nothing to do with it. All you did was during your lunch break. You picked her up, you dropped her off at home with some groceries. You have a newborn. You're married. She just went to drop off the groceries. She went to have her lunch. You had to get back on time because you're trying to be an upstanding member of your troop and get your stuff done and be an upstanding member of the armed services. Your wife dies. But the finger is pointed on you and you're thrown away into a cell and the key is thrown away. And there you sit. And meanwhile, this isn't conspiracy theory. This is conspiracy fact. There are things in the background that are much bigger than you, much bigger than I, much bigger than your local authorities going on to keep you there. It's chilling, folks. I know you might say, well, Tim, that kind of sounds like a little bit of a wackadoodle theory. What if I told you everything was written out in diaries? Everything was documented. Everything was in black and white. It was right there for you to read. But from the word go, from the word Jump Street, procedures weren't followed. There was documentation. And everything was in line and pointing to somebody else. But it was all purposely ignored. Sound intriguing? Well, I'll tell you, we're going to get to our guest here in just a second. Let me tell you about our guest. William J.Clark is the author of the book that we're going to talk about today. The book is called All Along the Watchtower, Murder at Fort Devens. And I'll tell you, folks, I spent some time with this book, and I was not only intrigued, I was horrified by the ending of this book. And you will be too when you pick it up and you read it. Just horrified. Will has learned the craft of writing as an apprentice under his cousin, William Craig, who wrote The Fall of Japan, Enemy at the Gates, and the Tashkent Crisis. He's also working on one project or another at any different time during his career. He's also on speaking engagements and research. You can book him for speaking engagements as well. He served 12 years in the military, and we thank him for his service. His first enlistment was in the U.S. Army, where he served in Operation Desert Storm with the 82nd Airborne and served with the 10th Special Forces Group at Fort Devens until he was deployed and assigned to the 1st Special Forces Operation Detachment Delta in Mogadishu. His next enlistment was with the United States Air Force as a crew chief for the next 8 years. After being discharged, he attended Gordon College in Wenham, Massachusetts, where he majored in history and graduated in 2005. He currently resides in North Kansas City, Missouri, with his wife and 2 daughters, Meadow and Danica. He enjoys his time off traveling, hiking, camping, boating, and playing golf. And it sounds like he has a wonderful life outside this chaotic world. Let's welcome in to True Crime Tuesday, William J.Clark. Will, thank you so much for joining us here on True Crime Tuesday.
Thank you for having me.
Boy, I tell you, just digging into this book, and the subject of our book is William Tyree, who had a long history of he and his family serving in the military. Let's get a little bit of background on William Tyree and just who he is and who our subject is here in the book. Tell us a little bit about William Tyree.
Well, he grew up in the Army. He was an Army brat. His dad was a sergeant major, and his dad retired, and they moved out to Utah. And Bill Tyree, there was never a question in his mind. He wanted to go in the military, be like his dad, serve his country, follow the lineage. And he dropped out of high school and enlisted in 1975. And he was went 82nd Airborne, and he was at Fort Bragg. And he was, the interesting part of this whole thing is he gets a discharge in 1970. I believe it was 76. He gets a discharge in November, hardship discharge. And he also hurt his ankle during a jump. So he goes back to Utah, and he meets a bunch of guys that were stationed down the road from his parents' house at a Army camp. And they're from 10 Special Forces. And he just happens to see a fight break out at a local bar, and this Army kid beats the hell out of another guy. And he looks at after the fight was over and stuff, and he says, I get the same training as you. And they get to talking, and he becomes friends with the group that's stationed down the road. They're on maneuvers and stuff. And the guy says, listen, if you ever decide to go back in the military, go, look us up. We're with 10th Group. We're out of Fort Devens. So Bill has a falling out with a girlfriend that he was serious with at the time, and he re-enlists in 1977. And he reports to Fort Lee, Virginia. It's kind of odd to the cadre there, the hierarchy, because he's got a jump status. He's got all this type of training, and Fort Lee was more administrative. Mm-hmm. Well, while he's at Fort Lee, he meets a girl by the name of Elaine Tyree. They fall in love, whirlwind romance, and next thing you know, he's getting deployed off to. He got orders to. He's being reassigned to 10th Group at Fort Devens.
Now, William, let me stop you right there, because it's kind of unusual how he and Elaine meet. I want you to kind of flesh out a little bit about how he and Elaine meet and how quickly they really mesh. Tell us a little bit about Elaine and how she and Bill meet.
Okay, Elaine was a very quiet, mild-mannered type personality. And she just happened to attend a party at a hotel, and Bill and his friends were jumping from the second balcony into the pool. And she was a little intimidated, I think, when she first met him. And Bill was a good-looking kid. He was both, at the time, he was 6'2", solid muscle, blonde hair. And she kind of came off like she was kind of scared of him, more or less, and intimidated. And a couple of weeks later, he bumps into her again she took his seat at the mess hall. And from there, she realized he wasn't just this crazy kid. He was sweet. He was kind to her and stuff, and very protective of her. There was an incident, but obviously it's been in the news ever since women got in the military, but there's a lot of, sexual assaults and stuff that took place. And this kid grabbed her one night on post, and Bill went there and beat the hell out of him and two other of his friends. And was, this was a woman that he just absolutely adored, admired, loved, and just saw his life. This is the person he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. And from there, when he gets sent to Devens, she came down during the Thanksgiving weekend. He snuck her in the barracks because most of the guys had gone home. And Elaine's like, well, if they want to look at me in the shower, they got to be naked too. And, kind of had a very laid back attitude towards things. She didn't get caught up in a lot of the stuff that went on. She was kept diaries constantly. She was always writing. It was, I don't know whether it was therapy for her or just, she's from Maryland, just a country girl type, joined the military, want to see the world a little bit. And, she absolutely was like in love with Bill. Once Bill got to Devens, he got, because of the fight with the guy that assaulted her, his hand got infected, and he was in the hospital for a little bit. And he called her up and said, just basically asked if she'd marry him, and she said yes. And they met. I want to say it was in about 1977, and they were married by the December 31st that year.
It was quick, wasn't it? I mean, he had, and we should explain to the listeners that he had gotten an infection from one of the punches, wasn't it? That he laid out one of the guys.
Right. I guess he had cut his hand, and it got infected with the fight. And I don't know exactly what he hit the guy. I guess it could have been a scrape from his knuckles on the pavement or something after the punch landed, but because he wasn't even too sure of how exactly it got infected, but, and that's why he was in the hospital. And he called her up and asked her to marry him. And she was, head over heels in love with him, and he was in love with her. And yeah, let's do it.
So it just develops really quick, really fast, and they knew they were one and the same, and they were meant for each other. So they got married very quickly, which it really was one of the, I think what I gather from what I read was really one of the first times, other than wanting to be in the armed forces and wanting to be at a high level in the armed forces, was one of the only things that Bill really felt like he belonged, wasn't it?
Yes, he absolutely wanted a family. He wanted the type of life his dad provided for him. He wanted that same life for himself.
So Bill and Elaine get married, and at this point, he had been, up until then, he had been staying on post, correct? He had been staying... Correct. And
he was staying in the barracks at 10th Group.
And at this point, he decides, if I get married, obviously I gotta move off post. I gotta figure out something.
Well, unfortunately, the military is not. It's, if you get married, it's not like. And she was in, like I said, the Army at the same time, so it's not like okay, we're gonna give her orders, ship her over to Devens right away, and it wasn't that quick. So he was able to. He had, I believe, it was 3 or 4 months. Before she got orders cut to go to Devens, and she was assigned, because obviously she wasn't special forces or anything, and she was assigned to permanent party at Devens, which at the time Devens had the Army Security Agency school, they had the engineers, and they had the 10th Group there. So that there was, those three groups more or less did their own thing, and then the permanent party was housekeeping service for these groups.
Now, what was it that Elaine had done previously before she got to Devens?
She was in administrative work.
Okay.
Like payroll, life insurance, that type of stuff.
So she was pretty flexible. She could go wherever she needed to, and that would make it easier for her and Bill to be together. Right.
As soon as there was an opening at Devens, they'd move her, or if Bill had been sent to Bad Tolls, Germany, or back to Bragg, because Special Forces is headquartered out of Fort Bragg. They could move them around. They could move her around, and they would be able to find a slot for her.
Now, in the meantime, Bill is doing some interesting stuff, to say the least. Well, it all comes, he kind of, when he got out of the Army the first time, a friend asked him, you've only been here on post for approximately 3 months out of your entire enlistment.
And where have you been? And, my brother saw you over in South America. And Bill just smiled and said, no, I've been here the whole time, because he had signed all types of security papers and stuff that, and to more or less, he couldn't talk about where he had been. He couldn't tell his family. He couldn't tell anyone. In 75, he gets pulled. He's at Bragg. He gets pulled out of formation and told to grab his mobility bag and head over to Pope Air Force Base and get on the green ramp. So Bill, good soldier, does what he does. And next thing you know, he's on a flight and he ends up in Panama. And it was the Air Force had just pulled out of the Air Force Base there. So the Panamanian government had taken it over. And he gets told he's going to be a crew chief for this Huey helicopter. And there's all kinds of other Huey helicopters there and stuff. And there's Green Berets. And he goes over, look over the aircraft. And next thing you know, he notices there's no nomenclature plates, which would show that this aircraft belonged to the U.S. government. And he starts talking to different guys about, he goes, well, what are we doing here? We're being told this, we're being told that. And, we're going to be out in the field for a time, and then we'll be back here. And one of the old timers looks at him and says, Tyree, you don't get it. He goes, you think it's raining, but the big dog's peeing. He goes, this is where we're at. He goes, you shut your mouth, do as you're told, more or less, and you'll be able to write your own ticket. And that's when he meets Colonel Catolo. And Colonel Catolo, tells him, do this, do that, and everything's fine. So they do a couple of missions. They go off, they fly off. He's not sure where. It's somewhere in the jungle. They land. The Special Forces guys get off the aircraft. The aircraft takes off. They go to an area and they sit and wait for radio confirmation. They're setting up landmines. They're told, keep an eye out here and there and stuff. And nothing happens. And all of a sudden, okay, we're packing up. A couple of days later, he packs up, gets in the aircraft. They go to pick these guys up. The Special Forces guy comes running out of the brush line at the LZ and says, see that area over there? Tyree goes, yeah. He goes, telling you now. He goes, anybody comes out of there, start firing. And Tyree's like, okay. And nothing happens. And he's on several of these missions. And there was one time there was a firefight and a couple of guys have been hit and stuff. And he's gotten commendations for this and everything. And at this time, he also meets another guy by the name of Colonel Carone. And he's not thinking anything of it. He was picked for the CIA. It was a CIA operation called Project Sandman, and it was where they were assassinating high-level military personnel. And he goes out in this area, takes a shot, kills the guy, gets back on, and him and Carone and Catolo, they all kind of know each other. Then he's out of the military. Then he's back in again in 77, and he's stationed at Devens under General John Ciaccavelli, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under Clinton. His brother was head of Special Forces 10th Group at Devens at the time. And Bill's working in 10th Group FST, which is supply, and he's learning the ropes, and he's full flash qualified by now. And because all the personnel in Devens, whether they were support or green or actual Green Berets, wore the Green Beret, but there was a little bar they wore under the Green Beret, which was called the flash, and that's what that would denote. Okay, this guy is an actual Green Beret, and this guy's just a truck driver or support personnel. So he's doing that, and Catolo, they have a big ceremony. Ciaccavelli hands over the reins of 10th Group to Catolo, and Catolo was West Point graduate, had been in various assignments down in South America, And he was viewed as someone whose star was on the rise. And he got word after he took over 10th Group that there was a possibility that Watchtower, he wasn't in charge of all the Watchtower missions, but he was in charge of a set of them. Well, at the time, Tyree was working within Watchtower. And Watchtower was it came out later on that Watchtower they had set up beacons so the planes could fly from Colombia to Panama loaded with cocaine and not be seen on radar.
Okay.
And Bill caught on to this when he was down in Panama. He witnessed the bales being unloaded by the Panamanian government and stuff, and he realized, okay, this is, way above my pay grade. And Colonel Catolo gets word while he's at 10th Group that, there's a possibility that Watchtower is going to be leaked to the public. So he decides to, or I don't know whether he decided to, or whether he was told to, let's put it that way, by the powers that be to, see what government officials know. And this is kind of interesting because when in 1994, Devens was deactivated, split up, and they sent 10th Group to Colorado, and they sent the Army Security Agency or Military Intel School. They sent all those people to Arizona. And I believe this case probably played a huge part in that decision due to the fact that Bill was assigned to a SAT group, which was a surveillance team. And they went out and they were monitoring anybody from Ted Kennedy to Catholic Church hierarchy to local mayors. They had surveillance on district attorneys, anything and everything to make sure that to find out if that operation was being leaked to the public by these special forces guys.
So,
and
Will, let me ask you a quick question, and I'm going to stop you right there. So they're still doing surveillance inside the U.S., but who's pushing their buttons and telling them to go after these different targets?
Catolo told them to, but I don't know who told Catolo.
Okay.
And at this point, it becomes Bill's out. Elaine is now sent to Fort Devens. She's assigned to the bachelor officer quarters, assigning rooms, cleaning rooms, things like that. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of theft going on at Devens at the time. I mean, with big posts and especially grunts or infantry soldiers. I mean, there's always a certain shadiness to a degree. I mean, the young kids, they don't know any better. They're worried about, I got to pay my bar bill, or I want to, go do this or go do that. So, somebody left a bunch of gear in a corner, for instance, and was in an office getting, taking care of business or something. They might go and grab the gear and sell it off at a local Army Navy store and stuff. And this is stuff I had seen when I was in the military and stuff. And, they'd get in trouble or whatever. But Devens was, more or less that type of activity on steroids. I mean, there were two 18-wheelers mm-hmm. that were stolen out of Devens, filled with weapons.
Yikes.
Filled with ammunition. Elaine witnessed a guy from 441st MID, Military Intel Detachment, burning target folders because he had sold them to the Russians. Oh. There were... 10th Group was involved in Germany during the Cold War. They had what target folders were there. It was more or less a list of places that they would hit and how they would hit it if the Cold War had broken out. And this officer that was burning the folders, well, he more or less disappeared. They knew about it. They weren't going to make it public. They weren't even going to prosecute him. They just put him in a VA mental ward. And he was forgotten about. And to this day, nobody really knows where exactly or what happened to him. John Newby, sergeant in 10 Special Forces, who was involved in the Watchtower, he went up to New York for training. They were doing halo jumps, high altitude, low opening, and his chute never opened. And it was believed that these types of things were going on to, if anybody questioned anything, they would completely destroy their lives and see you later. So Bill decides, with Elaine's pregnant now, she's at Devens, like I said, and everything's going good for him. He decides, well, Elaine's like, why are you working such odd hours? You're a supply guy. You shouldn't be gone at 3 a.m. Do you have a girlfriend? Are you partying with your friends? What's going on? And Bill's like, no, it's not that at all. We had to do inventory. He's making up any excuse in the world to cover up what he's really doing for the U.S. government. Mm-hmm. So he decides to go and talk to Catolo, and he tells Catolo, I want out. I don't want to be part of the SAT team anymore. And Catolo tells him, well, we're going to come down on you with CID. And he goes, why? Why are you doing this to me? This is my career. This is, I'm lined up to be soldier of the quarter. I've been given accommodations. This is insane to me. And Catolo says, no. He goes, listen, it's an Article 15. It's not the end of the world. And it's a little slap in the wrist. And so Bill's like, well, we'll see what happens. All of a sudden, Bill's friends, the guys he was hanging around with before Elaine came down and everything, they start getting in trouble. And rightfully so. Like, and Bill, while he was working at supply, noticed things were missing, things were being altered. He doesn't say anything. He more or less stays out of it. A good friend of his, Ken Darcy, who we met in Utah, who was the guy that was actually beating the hell out of the local tough guy at the bar, tells him, Bill, if I was you, I'd take any deployment out of, go TDY anywhere. Just don't be around Devens. And Bill's like, well, my wife's here. I got baby's coming. And, these guys are all right. So what if the, guy can't pay his car payment and they burn his vehicle? So it's got nothing to do with me. And still, they're my friends. They're going to look out for me. And of course, that wasn't the case at all. Yeah. And so, next thing you know, this one guy was going to get kicked out of the service, and they tell him, we're either going to give you a bad conduct discharge or we want Tyree. And so the guy says, well, if I get somebody to, witness, sign a paper saying that Tyree's at fault for theft or something, what do I get out of it? The guy, so they tell him, we'll give you an administrative discharge. It'll look better. You'll be able to get a job, this and that. Okay. And keep in mind, too, a lot of these guys that were in the military at this time were draftees from Vietnam era. So they weren't the cream of the crop. These are guys who were told, 2 years in the military or 4 years in prison. And they obviously chose the military. So Bill gets in, all of a sudden he gets accused of selling government equipment. And the guy that signed the paperwork that said he did it was a private by the name of Eric Aris. Aris was a small guy, maybe 5'5", squared away soldier for the most part, except he was known for doing anything for a buck. And he had a huge drug problem. And even his superiors knew about it. But it never affected his job. He was a parachute rigger. He packed the parachutes up for the jumps for 10th group. And so they more or less, if he's getting high in his off time, that's his problem. Who cares? He's not causing an issue or anything. So he signs paperwork and that says he bought rope off of Bill Tyree. And next thing you know, Bill Tyree's looking at a bad conduct discharge. He's looking at being prosecuted. And he talks to Iris. Iris says, he goes, well, it's nothing personal. He goes, yeah. And next thing you know, Iris walks into CID and recants the statement. And he says, well, this guy Peterson, who just got out of the military now, he's got his administrative discharge. He's the guy who paid me $20 to say this. So Bill's bad conduct discharge gets turned into a Article 15 because there's a question of credibility on the witness.
Now, Will, let's do this. We have to take our break.
Sure.
It's just a quick break here. When we come back, we'll find out what's going on with that Article 15 and the beginning of Bill's downfall here in the service, and then something much more shocking happening, which sets up the entire second half of the book, which is stunning to say the least. Folks, when we come back, you're going to be absolutely stunned at how this spirals downward from here. Like we were saying, it's amazing how you can set somebody up and watch them fall. The name of the book is All Along the Watchtower, Murder at Fort Devens. William J.Clark is our guest. He's the author of this book. We have a link in the description of this program to go get this book, but you can also pick it up at wildbluepress.com. It's available at all your international booksellers as well as amazon.com and barnesandnoble.com. When we come back, All Along the Watchtower, Murder at Fort Devens, we'll find out Bill Tyree and his Article 15 charge. We'll talk more about it with William J.Clark when we come back here on the Best in True Crime Podcasting. This is True Crime Tuesday. Welcome back to the Best in True Crime Podcasting. This is True Crime Tuesday. I'm Tim Dennis. The book is All Along the Watchtower, Murder at Fort Devens. Our guest is William J.Clark. He's the author of that book. When we left you, we were talking about Bill Tyree and the fact that he is now facing an Article 15. And pick up where we left off, Will. So Bill Tyree is now is turned that basically. Aris has said basically he's recanted on his statement saying Bill Tyree didn't try to sell me a stolen rope. And he's recanted on his statement. They've now turned that charge into an Article 15 on Bill Tyree. Pick up from there. What goes on from there?
Okay, so he's looking at an Article 15. He says he'll think about it. At that point, he gets reassigned from supply over to the 441st Military Intel Detachment. And while he's there thinking about the Article 15 and stuff, he develops a plan for mobility, and he is given a letter of commendation, which is highly unusual for someone who was just under bad conduct discharge and
it is.
Now is facing, Article 15. So he is called into Catolo's office, and Catolo tells him basically that I suggest you take the Article 15. And Bill says, he talks to his attorney about it. His attorney says, yeah, we'll take it, and then we'll fight it afterwards. Don't worry about it. At this time, he starts receiving, and Elaine starts receiving threats. There were phone calls in the middle of the night, shut your mouth, and all this type of stuff. And Bill mentions it to his parents. His parents get in touch with Utah Senator Garn, and there's an investigation that comes down the line about it. And they're looking into it. The post commander at this point wants to see Tyree, talks to him, Colonel Riches, and he's talking to Tyree, and Tyree's telling him on this date, he goes, I've logged it all down on the sheet of paper and stuff, what we received, and there's a written threat on my car and so forth. And the investigation with the Utah Senator seems to not really go anywhere. And Bill all of a sudden is told he's ordered to undergo a psych eval. And he's like, why? And well, we just, you haven't been acting right. You think somebody's after you. Go see the psychiatrist. So he goes to post psychiatrist, gets a clean bill of health, and that's it. Now it's late July of 78, and he's still working military intel. There's death threats here and there that are phone calls are still coming in and stuff, and Bill's figuring, well, we'll wait to see what happens. November 78, his daughter's born. And Bill's ecstatic. He's new father now. He's like all about the baby and everything. He figures, well, the military, the things like that have a way of working themselves out. I'm actually innocent of the charges, not a big deal. And Elaine is decides that she's got a few months left in her enlistment, and she decides, well, I really don't want to stay in the military, So Bill says, well, do you want to go back to Utah? Do you want to, with my family, do you want to go down to Maryland with yours, or what do you want to do? So as they're discussing this and everything, they decide, well, we're going to, she goes, I'll stay with you. And wasn't any big deal and stuff. And next thing you know, it's now, let's see, January of 79. And, Bill's signed off on the thing. They're going to, the Article 15, they're going to fight it and stuff. And it comes to light that Elaine's been keeping 2 sets of diaries at this time. And one diary was, her day to day, the baby did this, or, went food shopping type thing. And the other diary was all the little things she's overheard in the year that she's been at Devens.
Ooh.
With Bill's friends and what they've claimed and stuff, and things like the target folders being burnt at BOQ and other aspects that she's overheard on post.
And there's some big top secret stuff going on at Devens.
Right. There'd be if those diaries came to light, there would have been a lot of officers that would have been taken out of that post in handcuffs.
Yikes.
And she found out about she had mentioned in diaries about Watchtower. She had mentioned in the diaries that, the stolen equipment, the target folder, all kinds of little tidbits that she shouldn't have had privy to, but because she was in BOQ, she overheard conversations all the time. And Bill wasn't too happy about it, to say the least. He told her, he goes, you got to get rid of it. You can't be doing this. Like, this is, now he's starting to figure out what's going on and why they're coming down on him and others. And one of his good friends at the time, Earl Michael Peters, who was a big kid, from Virginia, I believe. And, he was kind of came off as a country bumpkin, liked to hunt, fish. And Bill was driving him home one night, and he looked at Bill and he said, those people with those types of diaries get their throats slit. And Bill's like, what are you getting at? He goes, I'm just saying. He goes, you got to be careful. So Bill doesn't think anything of it. Elaine does not like Peters. She thinks he's shady. There's something about him. And Bill had started to distance himself at that point, before that point anyway, from Peters. And brings us to January of 79. She's getting ready to muster out of the Army. And they've been eating lunch on post every day. And Elaine gets told that on January 30th, you have to, we need all your spare uniforms turned in. So Bill picks her up for lunch, and she tells him, I got to go pick up my spare uniforms at the house and get them all prepared to drop off. So Bill says, okay, well, they stop at the store. She gets her lunch. He drops her off at the house. So, I'll call you late when you're ready, and I'll come pick you up and bring you back to post. Everything's fine. They give a little kiss to each other. He takes off, and he calls up. That was at noon. He dropped her off. He calls up, I want to say around 1 o'clock, to see if she's ready to be picked up yet. And there's a male voice on the end of the phone. And the male voice identifies himself as Chief William Adamson of the Air PD. And Adamson says, you think you need to come to your apartment? We need to talk. Something's occurred. And Bill immediately jumps in his truck and heads off post, and he's intercepted by the Air PD because the chief had changed his mind and told another officer to intercept him and take him to the police station for interrogation. And what happened was that after Bill had drove off, there was Elaine went in the apartment, and the upstairs neighbor, Miss Elliott's, heard Elaine scream and say, "Get away from me! Get out of here!" And she went downstairs, knocked on the door. There was no response. She went back upstairs. She called the police. Officer Deckett of the Air PD shows up, knocks on the door. Air PD, please open up. No response. And he just happens to look down and he sees a couple of droplets of blood. He goes outside the building to get in his cruiser and call for backup. And he notices a screen from the apartment that's now laying on the ground. And he walks over, looks through the window. He can't see anything. He says, okay. He comes back. He calls and next thing you know, Chief Adamson shows up, and the landlord for the building shows up to unlock the door. And the minute they open the door, there's a female in army fatigues on her back in a pool of blood. And the apartment is completely ransacked and like there was a struggle. And Bill finds out that his wife's been murdered.
Yeah.
And he obviously upset about it, and he starts thinking about the death threats and everything else. And over the course of the next 2 weeks, it's just a lesson in complete madness what goes on. The police, send the body off to the autopsy and everything else. They never asked permission to enter the premises. They never went and got a search warrant. The state police become involved. When the murder occurred, they called, obviously, they knew it was a soldier, so they called off-post liaison's office, and they came down. Well, the two guys that were investigating Tyree at Army CID decide there were no phone calls, no requests for assistance, nothing from Air PD. They showed up the minute they heard that Elaine Tyree had been murdered off post. And they start their own investigation, and which was completely out of protocol. There was no reason for them to investigate. It wasn't their jurisdiction. And Bill, the end of the day, after everybody wants to know what his whereabouts were that day, what he did. He kept going over and over his story never changed. Mm-hmm. He goes back to post, and Colonel Catolo puts him under guard, which was another unusual thing, because when Army personnel is put under guard, it's usually because they're getting ready to be arrested, or they're suicidal, or but there was no reason for Bill wasn't suicidal. Right. He had gotten a clean bill of health from his mental eval a few months back. He never made a suicidal gesture or comments during the interviews and stuff. And they put him with Earl Michael Peters. I'm sorry, with Earl Michael Peters. They put him with Earl Michael Peters. Peters was with him for about 2 days, and then Peters was going home on leave. And they signed Dennis Testagrossa, who was a roommate of Peters, to keep an eye on him. And Bill's, obviously being a special forces soldier, being an A-type personality, he wanted to know, he was going to figure out who did this. He didn't trust the police, and just felt like, hey, I'm going to figure out who did this. I have inside knowledge they don't have, and we'll go from there. And now it's time for Elaine to be buried. They go down to Maryland.
Well, let me stop you real quick here, Will, because there's a couple of points I want to hit here before we go too far, before we go to the burial. And that is this: you pointed out that the police, not only the state police, but the police in general, didn't have a search warrant. Didn't they have access to the apartment for over a month, or what was the time frame there without a search warrant?
They had it was well over 30 days. They had access to it. Nothing was ever cataloged that was in the apartment. There was no chain of custody. That night, the only time they did receive permission was when Bill had to go to the apartment and pick up some stuff for the baby and pick up a dress for the funeral. And they asked if they could come in, and Bill said, yeah. And they took a couple of things off the fridge and that were on the table and stuff. And it was never documented what they took.
There was also, on top of the refrigerator, there was a coffee can, and there were a couple of letters in that coffee can. Will you explain to people what those letters were and how they came into the case a little bit later to try and create some doubt in the case?
Well, it's always been alleged that the set of diaries that Elaine kept on the criminal activity have never surfaced. And it's always been alleged that was the true motive for the crime. The district attorney's office tried to say, the crime was due to him wanting the insurance money. Well, Bill never attempted to go to the insurance companies and collect any of it. He was more concerned with finding his wife's killer. And they found a speeding ticket. I think it was from New York, and there were a couple of letters in there, and they grabbed those, and they were alleging that Bill brought forth a suit in the 80s stating that his civil rights had been violated, and Air PD in the state of Massachusetts, he proved in court that, and was awarded a sum of money and everything for the fact that there was never a search warrant involved and so forth. And they were ordered to give back everything they took. And to this day, nothing has ever been returned to Bill from what they took out of the apartment. And they had been in and out of there numerous times. And the Chief Adamson admitted to it. Oh yeah, we went down there. We were discussing possible ways it happened, because Adamson originally thought the perpetrator was waiting outside in the hallway, and then they're saying no, he was inside, and they're trying to figure out exactly where it occurred and how it happened. But that was all a ruse, because Bill believes they were searching the apartment for those diaries.
Yeah, and it certainly seems like they were. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And okay, so so anyway, they're getting ready to. Elaine's body gets sent down to Maryland to be buried. Bill is not a drinker; he never has been, and he's down there, and they send an honor guard. And these were all special forces and military intel guys. And Bill didn't think anything of it right away. Only years later, Elaine wasn't a special forces soldier. an honor guard should have been should have been people made up of people that were permanent party. He believes these guys were sent down there to keep an eye on him. And Bill poured about probably $60 to $100 worth of good booze down his throat, and he has a breakdown. And he's flipping out, and they take Bill and they send him to Walter Reed Army Hospital for eval. He's down there for a couple of days. Obviously, they realized, okay, it was the alcohol that was involved that caused him to, he was having delusions. He didn't know who to trust. He was a man without a country, basically. Mm-hmm. And so he comes back. I'm straight now. I'm good. Okay. And he goes to mess hall one morning on February 13th, and Earl Michael Peters sits down across from him and tells him, I got a feeling that murder weapon is wrapped in plastic and it's still around. He goes, in fact, I think Aris is the one who did it. And Bill has said off the record that at that moment, he knew Peters knew more than he was letting on. So he felt that Peters was setting up Aris. So he went and talked to Aris, and he said, at lunch, he tells Aris, he goes, you did me a favor. He goes, but I don't, he goes, if that murder weapon's still around, he goes, I'll give you $5,000 for it. So Aris says, yeah, I can get my hands on it. And Aris is, like I said, a known drug addict, would do anything for money. Mm-hmm. And Bill immediately says, okay, meet me outside main post. There's a little shopping plaza called Devens Shopping Plaza. He goes, meet me there at 5:00. So he calls up Chief Adamson, and he tells him, hey, this guy's got the murder weapon. We're okay. So they set up a plan that he's going to turn his wipers on when Aris hands him the knife, and they'll arrest Aris. And Bill's like, Aris will cop to where he got the knife from and everything else. And Aris doesn't show. Well, Aris is on, he's got extra duty because he got in trouble for something. And so Bill shoots over and finds Aris, and Aris is at bachelor enlisted quarters there, the barracks, and he says, what happened? He goes, I got extra duty. He goes, it's going to take me a little longer to get it. So Bill goes up to Peter's room and tells him, yeah, Aris said he needs more time to get the knife. Peter says, the knife is, I saw it in his jacket. He put it under his pillow. So Bill goes, oh. So he shoots downstairs, and he calls his friend Menzie, who was the only true friend he really had on post. And Menzie and his girlfriend come running up to pick him up and take him to CID. So he's going to go in and tell CID, Aris has a knife, it's in his room. Before Menzie pulls up, Peters comes out, and Peters pulls a .45 on Bill and tells Bill, I really didn't want to kill her. We need those diaries. And Bill looks down, and it's the .45 he had bought off Peters that was never found in the apartment that Elaine carried all the time while she was receiving those death threats. Mm-hmm. And he goes, I've enough of the killing. He goes, I don't want to kill you. He goes, but let's stick to the story. It's ours. Menzie pulls up. Bill gets in the car. They head off to CID. As they're pulling out of the parking lot, CID is coming into the parking lot.
Oh, my God.
Well, they never received permission to search the premises until 5:00 at night. Well, this was at, I want to say, I'm sorry, it was either 5 or 6. I'd have to look at my notes exactly, but the timeline's off. They contacted Agent Brzezinski contacted Colonel Riches by phone told him, oh yeah, Bill Tyree, he's a stand-up guy. Never once said, I had him under investigation. I've been investigating this murder. None of that. Tells him, oh yeah, he's a stand-up guy. We believe him. The murder weapons in this kid's room. So he says, okay, I'll give you verbal authorization. I got to go off post. I'll be back about 10 o'clock tonight and I'll sign the paperwork. Agent Mason of CID was already in the room searching it when Brzezinski received authorization to search the room. So that was another issue that was never raised at trial or anything. And Bill goes to CID and tells Brzezinski, hey, this is where the weapon is. But so Brzezinski says, okay, write it out for me. Who told you? But so he starts writing that he was in 39th Engineer Mess Hall this morning, and he spoke with Peters. And Brzezinski comes in, reads it, tears it up, and says, put Aris's name down. He goes, but it isn't how it happened. Put Aris's name down. After about the third time, Bill complies with what they want. Now he's being held there without being arrested. They walk in Aris's room. They find the knife wrapped in plastic, with bloodstains on it, under a pillow. And Aris is placed under arrest. He's brought down to CID. They know he's high. They found a footlocker filled with pills, everything from Quaaludes to Percocets to the Klonopins, all kinds of things. And he's never charged with the charge. It's never even mentioned except for the inventory of Aris's room. And they proceed to investigate. And Aris sticks to the story that, Bill had nothing to do with it. Then there's 18 minutes of missing interview tape. And it comes back, yeah, Bill did it. Yeah, he wanted his old lady gone, so he told me he'd pay me the insurance money to do it. Bill is arrested. Aris is arrested. And then they're arrested again on the 14th. And he immediately gets shot up to the House of Correction in Billerica. And he receives a couple of letters, and it appears to be Earl Michael Peters' confessions saying why he did it. And it's coming out of Devens, the envelopes and all this. And he notified his attorney at the time and stuff, and they decide, well, we're going to have a probable cause hearing. And this turns into the longest probable cause hearing in the history of Massachusetts. And Judge Killam, wonderful judge, and he, about 2 days into the trial, he realizes the testimony is being coached. Something's not right here. So he warns Chief Adamson, you better not be coaching these people who are testifying, or you're going to be in serious trouble. So a lady came in and starts testifying that, oh, Bill hit on me and while his daughter was being born in the hospital. And something didn't sit right with the judge. So he turns around and says, well, did you receive any phone calls from Chief Adamson? Oh yeah, I received one last night telling me what to say in court. So the judge immediately looks at Adamson, tells him to stand up. He goes, do you know where the House of Correction is in Billerica? And Adamson says, yes. He goes, well, I suggest you stop doing what I told you to stop doing yesterday. He goes, or you'll be going there in handcuffs. So now these people testifying aren't being intimidated into what they're supposed to say. And it comes to Earl Michael Peters' testimony, and the judge, which is highly unusual in probable cause hearing, he wants to question this guy. And he starts talking to him. He says, well, how do you get an animal? How do you do this? How do you do that? And the judge happened to be looking at the crime scene photos, and he sees a couch in the photo, and there was storage under this pull-out couch in Bill's apartment. And he says, okay. He goes, he asked the lawyers and stuff. He goes, "Well, what was in the?" And Peter said, "Oh, well, I bought a shotgun rather. Bought a shotgun when I was with Bill and Elaine, and they stored it for me till I went on leave." So he's asked questions more and more, and it comes to light that this gun probably was there at the time of the crime scene. And the records are pulled from the arms room at 10th Group, and there's two different numbers that serial numbers that were put in for a gun Peters turned in, and Remington Firearms that sold the shotgun that Peters had purchased, that was never their serial number. And there's a huge investigation in this, and he says, okay, the numbers don't match up, the gun's missing. He says the arms room, they found the receipt a week later in the trash that Peters, things like that weren't adding up. And the record books had been whited out, which I don't know if you're familiar with the military, but if you white out something when there's a huge issue with that because of the fact that the records ought to be kept, absolutely perfect. And it just there were too many issues with it. And so at the end of the probable cause hearing, Judge Killam turns around and decides, well, you know what? I don't want to go with, we're not prosecuting Tyree for murder. We're prosecuting, he obstructed justice by not cooperating with the police. Absolutely. And he's an accessory after the fact because of that. He goes, but I want Earl Michael Peters arrested for murder and Iris arrested for murder in the first degree as well. And accessory before and after the fact for both of them in conspiracy. And Chief Adamson refused to do it. And Bill leaves the courtroom thinking, hey, this is great. I've finally been vindicated, and next thing you know, he never leaves the prison cell because 8 days prior to the Judge Killam's decision, there was a secret grand jury indictment, which is another highly unusual. Yeah. Usually you'd be one or the other. Yeah. And so now he's in a fight for his life from him and Iris are being prosecuted. And it seemed like Peters was the golden boy. And in the 1980s, his mother came down. Tyree's mother came to the state of Massachusetts and decides, I'm going to file charges against Earl Michael Peters. Because Tyree had a feeling something wasn't right. Something's not being, he goes, the state of Massachusetts isn't telling us everything. And when she files charges against Peters, the paperwork comes out that the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts says, Earl Michael Peters, no one can be arrested in this case unless we say so. That's never happened in a murder case ever. And this is the government's witness. So, but to backtrack a little bit, after the probable cause hearing, it comes out that the Air Courthouse had been bugged the entire time by a guy named Kaiser, who was the janitor. And he had a huge, very high security clearance in the military. He had been involved with the Army, the start of the Army Security Agency. This is one of the guys that was first on the ground after they dropped the bomb in Hiroshima. Wow. And the state police and the Air PD knew during the probable cause hearing that he had bugged every single courtroom, every single hallway. He had bugged the phone bank, the telephone banks. He knew every single thing that was going on, and he died shortly after his arrest, and the government destroys all these tapes. Well, and then says, oh, Bill's civil rights weren't violated, but they were.
The thing I found fascinating, Will, was not only had he bug the place, but he had figured out a way to. And there's a what was the judge's name? David Andrews, was that his name?
Yes, he had judged he had bugged the judge's quarters as well.
Yeah, so he claims that the whole reason he was doing this was because of the kinship and protection for one particular judge that he had taken a trip with to Mexico, and this judge had a love of pornography, and he took the fall for this particular judge, and so for that reason he had to bug the entire courthouse. I still can't figure out the correlation of that entire deal. And then he also said that you'll never find any of the devices because at night I'll slip a device in and then I'll take it away. So that they didn't actually find too many of his devices, but they did take some of the limiters off the phone that kept the phone system going, because the phone system was actually connected to the payphone. Right. In the courthouse. So essentially they brought in a team to sweep for bugs, an independent team to sweep for bugs. And they did sweep for bugs, and they only found a few of Kaisen's bugs, and a microphone and some other things, and a box that controlled the microphone. So they did get some evidence of him bugging the courthouse. And
they found the tapes at his house. Right. But they also screwed up the limiter system in the phones that ran the courthouse phones, because they were being that thorough of getting everything that didn't look like it belonged in the phones, which I found ironic. I mean, it was, and to not immediately, declare like, okay, this guy's civil rights are definitely being violated here. There's people listening in. Where did these tapes go? Who had knowledge of it? The Army Security Agency, absolutely. The SAT teams, Operation Orwell, that Bill was involved with at the start when Controller took over 10th Group, that was still in operation. There's even been claims that they the SAT team witnessed who came out of that building when Elaine was killed. Mm. And that paperwork has never been found, or that came out in in 1980. Colonel Catolo was over in England on military maneuvers, and his vehicle hit a tree, and he died. And they said, well, he was a drunk. It was drunk driving. This is a guy, you wouldn't, if you were an alcoholic, you would not be in charge of 10th Group. You would not have had even his own children find it difficult to swallow that story. And, he might have a drink at a party or something. He was not known for frequenting bars or offices, clubs, or anything like that. And, he dies under suspicious circumstances. And an affidavit surfaced years later, and saying the SAT team witnessed this, and it's questionable as to whether he wrote it or not. And it doesn't sound like the way it is written does not sound like the way he spoke, according to his friends and family. And however, it's somebody that knew what was going on. I guess it may have produced it. No one really knows. There's Special Forces. Colonel Bo Riddick did an investigation into this. He was investigating Watchtower, and his findings. I mean, this is a guy who was highly decorated, John Wayne type personality, and some of the things some of his exploits, you could sit back and say, well, maybe it didn't happen quite like that or something, but I mean, he's proven that Operation Watchtower existed, and that Bill Tyree took place in it, and that there were all kinds of issues involved in Tyree's case that the powers that be are controlling. When Tyree was on the SAT team, the surveillance team for Operation Orwell, he was listening in on John Droney, who was Middlesex District Attorney, who was the Middlesex District Attorney in his case. And he knew that Droney was a homosexual back in the 70s before, it was fashionable, so to speak. And he overheard things of Cambridge police murdering an escaped felon. And these are things that you can't make up. If he wasn't on Operation Orwell, he wouldn't have had knowledge to these things. And there's just so much to the story that it really, you really see how much involvement the government has in your life without realizing it.
Yeah.
And the whole Big Brother, dark state is ever present throughout this entire story. And like even Colonel Carone, who I mentioned earlier, his daughter, when here's a guy who grew up in New York, as a kid, he knew a lot of the mafioso, the five families and stuff. And World War II breaks out. He becomes a member of the OSS. And after World War II, he's working for the CIA, and he's still a member of the New York Army National Guard. And come to find out, he was the bag man for all the cocaine that was coming in the country under Operation Orwell. Under Operation Watchtower, that was being sent to Mena, Arkansas. And this stuff was so pure, it was stored for years. And this was the stuff of the crack epidemic of the 80s.
Wow. And
when he died, his daughter goes to the military funeral and everything. And the stone says Sergeant Carone, and she goes, "No, I got pictures. I got all the documentation. My father was a colonel." And she starts talking to a couple of former friends of her dad's, who were in high-ranking places in Washington, and they said, "Oh, we'll take care of it." And bam, it says Colonel Carone all of a sudden. And then she's like, "But." She had documentation of different bank accounts and stuff that were completely wiped. And even if you look at Bill's case, here's a guy, he's convicted of murder, and he receives an honorable discharge.
That's crazy.
This is a one-of-a-kind case. And his entire, in the military, they have what they call a 201 file on service members, or at least I used to. I don't know if it's still there now, but a 201 file is places you've trained and different accommodations, things like that. And Bill's entire file has been sanitized to the point where his jump status was removed. And then under FOIA, he requested some paperwork, and all of a sudden there's in the paperwork he receives is one of his pay stubs showing that he had jump status. So then they had to add airborne qualified back onto his record. And no time in the history of the United States military has anyone ever been convicted of murder while in the service and had received an honorable discharge. And Eric Aris, I've talked to during the course of the 10 plus years I've been involved in the story, and he recanted his statements about, recanted his statement that Bill had anything to do with the murder. He says he doesn't even remember what went on. He was so high. And that was the other thing Judge Killam picked up on was Elaine was I want to say about 5'9". She wasn't fat or anything. She was, a little heavy set, and she had stab wounds in the top of her head. How would a guy, and she had training in personal defense.
Yeah.
So how would a guy that was 5'5" at the most be able to inflict those kind of wounds on her body? Peters was 6'2", much bigger than Elaine. And that was the other thing with the course of when Bill's mother came up in the 80s and tried to file charges against Earl Michael Peters again. She got an affidavit from the landlord that said she saw that the landlord saw Earl Michael Peters walking through the parking lot of the apartment buildings, and he was carrying a green and white Remington shotgun box.
Which is the most damning evidence of all. Right.
And then there was another witness that they had received, Vias Williams, who was in the Army. He was never called to testify in probable cause. The Army more or less buried him. He was in the adjoining building and home at the time of the murders, and he witnessed a guy running through. He was on the second floor, and he witnessed a guy running behind the building on ice and snow. And he said, and they showed him pictures of ours. He said, that's not him. And he was driven around by CID on post. And what about this? No, he never was able to point out who it was. And you kind of wonder why. Was it because of the fact that Peters was sent on leave at the time? After the murder occurred, 2 days later, Peters was, off post. Mm-hmm. So was it purposely covered up? Peters was never dragged before, in any lineup or anything. And then Peters went in after Bill got arrested. Peters goes into CID the next day and gives testimony that Bill wanted to know if he could take a shot from, I think it was 300 yards and hit a moving target. If, like, say, him and his wife were driving down a road. Why wouldn't, if somebody had come to me and said that, immediately I would have gone and reported it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have waited months till after she died, after he was arrested. And then Dennis Testagrossa came in and made a statement against Bill Tyree too. And it was just so illogical the way even Helen Keller could see the writing on the wall on this one.
Yeah, very true. Very true. I want to kind of leave things where they are right now, because there is some, and we'll just say this, Will, at the end of this book, if you ever want to be shocked to your core, you leave it at a place where, let's just say, the next generation is following up on some things, and they just so happen to run into Bill Tyree. It's they're following up on some things, and they cross the path of Bill Tyree. And what they follow up on absolutely astonishes, I think, everyone. If you're not astonished by it, you're not living and breathing. And it will absolutely shock you as to how deep the roots of this thing really is, and how and just how corruption runs through our country.
Right.
I've said it before, and again, that we don't tend to make too many political statements on this program, but I've said it before on the show. I've worked in radio for over 30 years, and I've worked on both sides of the fence in radio. And I've tried to tell people this, and they just don't believe me, Will. And I say to them, there's no such thing as left or right. There's no such thing as a Democrat or a Republican. They're all in bed together. It's all a show.
Right.
They put on a show in front of the cameras for you. And then they all sit and slap each other on the back and shake hands and have a drink when the cameras are shut off in private. And it's a business. It really is a business. And people just don't believe it. They really do believe the stuff that is shilled to them in front of the cameras. And some of them to a point where if they could just see some of this stuff from behind the scenes, it would turn their stomach.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's in this case is I'd say a prime example of that. It's a kid who basically the story is a kid who wanted to serve his country, believed in government, believed in military, and the higher up he got, the more corrupt it got.
Yeah. So I encourage everyone to go get a copy of this book, All Along the Watchtower, Murder at Fort Devens, and see for yourself. You know, it's there. There are, and let me preface it by saying this: there are good people out there that try to do good work, and really do try to uphold the Constitution of the United States, that do try to make change within this country, that do try to uphold the vision of the Founding Fathers. And then you do have the people that come in and see the opportunity to take everything for what it's worth and try to line their pockets. There's a combination of both. But our guest, William J. Craig, has done a beautiful job of turning the light on the darkness in this book, because it's there, folks. And by gosh, it's all mapped out for you. Will, I want to thank you so much for being on the program today, and thank you so much for writing this book. It is just an example of how just a quick couple of turns can put you in a position where your life is thrown away. Right. Yeah, I just I don't know what to say other than that. It's just unspeakable. You know, I just for the audience, we can tell them this much: Bill is still in prison, isn't he?
Yes, he is. It's been over 40 years.
That's a shame. It's a shame indeed. Will, what do you have on the horizon, and how can people look you up or follow you?
I'm on Facebook, William J. Craig, author. There's Free Bill Tyree is another Facebook page, and All Along the Watchtower, Murder at Fort Devens on Facebook as well. And I should be making some appearances either in July or August in Massachusetts area to promote the book. So hopefully everybody come out. Happy to meet you and sign books, and we'll get the story out there. And hopefully with everything going on in the news and everything concerning prosecutorial misconduct and innocent people in prison, Bill might be one of the ones that gets exonerated from this.
Well, let's hope. All right, Will, I want to thank you so much again for being on the show. All right, it's a time where if you're listening to the free version of the show, we must bid you adieu. But if you don't want to leave us right now, you don't necessarily have to. What you can do is you can go to Stitcher.com, click on the subscribe button under Stitcher Premium. That will get you to listen to Dumb Crime, Stupid Criminals. That'll get you to listen to the ad-free version of Darkness Radio. And that'll get you to listen to hundreds of podcasts ad-free and expand your audio horizons more than you could possibly ever imagine. And the best thing is you can do it for just $5 a month. Do it right now. Go to Stitcher.com, click on that premium button, subscribe to Stitcher Premium for just $5 a month. You'll get Dumb Crime, Stupid Criminals as far as True Crime Tuesday. You'll get an ad-free Darkness Radio. And of course, you'll get hundreds of podcasts ad-free and expand those audio horizons. Go ahead and do it today.